Just a quick reminder about the gift-giving exercise. If you haven't brought a gift with you, you can use any item or object within the room that you happen to find, but we've also supplied some potential gifts at the back of the room under what's called the gift-giving table. At any point of the day when you want to distribute your gift, where you want to share how you've experienced the day, if you could put it on the table by the food with a little note about why you've chosen that gift, we'd really appreciate it. It's part of our evaluation pilot. You can do that at any point today, but just as a reminder. So I'm going to pass over to Ankita to do the final meditation practice. You're not doing it? Oh, later. All right, I'm passing on to Elin to present on her KE project with the center. You've got a mic as well. Oh, I thought we were starting the session. Oh.
Check, check, check. Thanks, Alex. And hello, everybody. Eid Mubarak. Really nice to be in community with everyone today. Such a special event to sort of celebrate the work that's been done over the past 3 years. So I've been a partner with the centre since it started in 2022. So I'm going to talk about some of the projects that I've done whilst being a partner. I am doing more of a conventional type of a presentation, a talk. So I'll try and make it as engaging as possible. I'm going to be showing loads of images and a couple of film clips as well. So I'm Elin Lee, an artist and filmmaker based in Sheffield. And, well, you'll find out more in this presentation. We're going to turn the lights off. I've got to put glasses on. Right. Oh, I also have to do clicking. Right. All right, then. So my presentation is called Becoming EC, or ESEA, which stands for East and Southeast Asian. Just a quick trigger warning. The third slide I'm going to show shows the results of racially motivated hate crimes towards ESEA elders. So in 2020, the xenophobic framing of the coronavirus's origin led to a surge of hate crime towards East and Southeast Asian people. Trump regularly referred to the coronavirus as Kung flu and the China virus. Memes like this one on social media fueled a surge in racist attacks against Chinese-looking people here, in America, and across Europe. In San Francisco, where one of the oldest diasporic Chinese communities resides, elders were violently attacked. Chinese students here in Sheffield were victims of racist attacks, some targeted simply for wearing a mask. Yellow peril had once again reared its ugly head. Yellow peril was a phrase coined in the late 19th century to drum up fear of the East as being an existential threat to the West. It's a racist ideology that paints East and Southeast Asians as primitive and power-crazed. It blends Western anxieties about sex and xenophobic fears of the other. In response to this surge in hate crimes, a racial justice movement galvanized using the hashtag #StopAsianHate. Lots of community organizing began, and here in the UK, we embraced the term EC. Many EC groups and collectives emerged. Just a few shown here. There's EC Archives, EC Music Collective, EC Literature Festival, and the EC Heritage Month of September that started in 2019 suddenly became a very busy month in the cultural calendar. So historically, anti-racist discourse in the UK has often referred to the Black and Asian experience, where Asian referred to South Asian, the Indian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi diasporas. The East and Southeast Asian experiences were missing, and our identities were often conflated as simply being Chinese. And as you can see from the maps, East and Southeast Asia covers a very big area, with lots of different stories of migration. So the term EC is a way of creating space for discourse around our diverse and complex histories. as well as complicating notions of Asianness and Britishness. It's a term specific to the UK, one that has emerged from the racialized experience. So in 2022, I became a partner with the Centre for Equity and Inclusion. With the Centre's support, I began a creative inquiry into finding new ways of embodying EC identities through the creation of new mythological characters. So my practice is always collaborative, so the method transferred tools and processes I developed over 20 years, such as collective research and co-learning, collaborative costume making to transform the body, and improvised theatre techniques to develop character and story. So trying to be representative of the whole EC diasporas was not going to be possible. So using my own British-born blended Hong Kong and English body as a starting point, I collaborated with other Hong Kongers in my hometown of Sheffield and the wider region to explore Hong Kongness. Hong Kong Future Diaspora marked the beginning of a process-led inquiry supported by the Centre and Block Projects, an independent gallery here in Sheffield, working closely with the then curator, Sunshine Wong, who's here today. So I want to share with you some of the process that we used throughout the projects, which can be thought of as a series of anti-racist strategies or creative acts of defiance. So we started with a series of workshops, creating intimate spaces for co-learning, where we shared personal and family stories privately and safely. For British East and Southeast Asians, this was a rare moment of being in community with an exclusively ESEA space. At least 3 of us here are British-born and raised around takeaway or restaurant businesses. In this image, there are 2 PGRs from the university who had grown up in Hong Kong and Singapore, honorary Southeast Asian. Another had only recently arrived in the UK as an exiled migrant from Hong Kong after the crackdown on free speech by the Chinese Communist Party. So our experiences reflected a confluence of oppressions, racism in the West, and a state-controlled regime in Hong Kong. So we're practicing deep listening whilst collectively note-taking. We're notating each other's stories and bodies. When someone spoke their notes back to you, it was a very special experience. Not only did I feel seen and heard, I felt held and reflected. These are just a few more images from those moments. As a former British colony, Hong Kong has always sat between 2 oppressors: China, the power from the land, and Britain, the power from the sea. We discovered our shared histories in these politicized waters, particularly the stretch of water that separates Hong Kong from mainland China. My brother-in-law was one of the many people who swam from China to Hong Kong in the 70s. It took him 8 hours. Villages in the new territories adopted these refugees from the mainland, and then there they were able to start new lives. And sharing food is always a central activity when East and Southeast Asians get together. So we took our stories and began to translate them into creating mythological characters. We embarked on collective costume making to transform the human body, hot seating, which is a drama technique where the person in role is asked questions such as, well, it can be anything, but such as, where have you come from, what do you want, how long have you been here, etc., etc. This is a way of developing character and story. So Clara's character was inspired by the mythical character of Lo Ting, who is half human, half fish, but not a mermaid. It has human legs and fish heads. So allegedly, Lo Ting is based on real people from long ago. They were freedom fighters from northern China who had to flee after a failed uprising. So they took shelter in the marshlands on the edges of Hong Kong around Lantau Island, and they only came out at night. And over time, they developed fish heads, so they could survive in water and on land. Lo Ting has more recently been adopted by Hong Kongers as a mythological character who reflects their current situation, especially for those who are actively involved in the pro-democracy movement and find themselves in exile. Having grown up in a Chinese takeaway in Chesterfield, Anna's character was inspired by the concept of wok hei, the breath of the wok. We also had a navigator character, and my character was called Hybridity. We collaborated with a choreographer, a somatic movement practitioner, to discover movement from within our bodies. And we developed a performance that moved through 8 stages of becoming diaspora, from awakening, gathering, resisting, traveling, protesting, blessing, navigating, and resting. We exhibited work in progress at block projects and performed a scratch performance on the opening night. So I'm just going to play you a little clip that shows some of the highlights from that.
喺水定喺地
In water or on land?
喺水定喺地
In water or on land? 喺水定喺地 In water or land? 喺水定喺地 In water or on land? 容易呼吸嗎 Is it easy to breathe? 容易呼吸嗎 Is it easy to breathe? 容易呼吸嗎 Is it easy to breathe?
Okay, so very much a scratch performance, or like to test some of the ideas that we've been working on in the workshop space. And a great opportunity to sort of share work in progress with the public at block projects. Okay, so the following year, in 2023, we made the second iteration, 4 Quadrants of the Sky. I worked with all of our research and mapped our characters and their cosmologies onto an ancient system of mapping the stars. In Chinese celestial thinking, the sky is divided into quadrants, with custodians of the north, south, east, and west. The dragon in the east, the phoenix in the south, the white tiger in the west, and the turtle in the north. So in our version that you see here, we have Wok Hei in the east, Hybridity in the south, Lo Ting in the west, and the Navigator in the north, creating a new constellation of diasporic identity and becoming. I worked with a costume designer to develop the costumes, and we went back into the workshop space to rehearse the creation of the film. Some images from the workshops. In the final exhibition at Block Projects, we exhibited the costumes, and the film was projected in 2 channels onto the wall, creating an immersive experience for the viewer. And the last project I want to share with you is a street procession that was made as part of Dig Where You Stand, an archival justice movement set up by Sheffield-based writer Desiree Reynolds and was coordinated through the centre last year. I'm not going to go into the details of the process of developing the work. I used a similar workshop methodology to develop a new mythological character in honour of the first recorded Chinese people in Sheffield, who happened to be a group of magicians who performed here in 1855. The difference with this particular project is I also ran a series of workshops that were open to East and Southeast Asian communities in Sheffield. So inviting people to bring ancestral objects and recreate them from paper and card. I also invited community members to send me images of ancestors that I printed into placards. So the Chinese magicians were led by a couple who had a 5-week-old baby with them, but the baby sadly died whilst they were in Sheffield and is buried in St. Paul's Churchyard, which is now the Peace Gardens. And we know that because there's an entry in the burial register in Sheffield Archives who's listed as, the baby's listed as a son of A Chow, Ah Chow, and in brackets, Chinese. So our procession was led by the character that we devised called Wan Chou, who awakens from a long celestial sleep. When her body remembers the place where the baby died, she is consumed by grief. Okay. And the procession then begins to move. A funeral march followed by East and Southeast Asian community members carrying paper recreations of ancestral objects and images of ancestors. When we reached the site of the former burial ground, Wan Chou conjures the spirit of the dead child. The grief turns to joy and moments of rage. It took place during Hungry Ghost Festival, a time when some East and Southeast Asian cultures believe the dead walk amongst the living. In the tradition of Hungry Ghost Festival, we left offerings for the child so he could return to the spirit world nourished and loved. So this took place last August at the time of the far-right riots. We had to think carefully about whether to go ahead with the procession to keep everyone's safety at mind. But as we decided to go ahead with it, it felt like an act of defiance. Not only were we marching our bodies and our stories into the streets, we were reclaiming public space. So here's a few quotes from participants and audience members. The quote, "I felt visible," is really significant for East and Southeast Asian communities. One of the stereotypes used against us is the model minority trope. We're quiet and hardworking and don't kick up a fuss. Being visible en masse, collectively making noise and taking up public space gave us agency, challenging lazy/racist assumptions about East and Southeast Asian people. So looking back at this work over the past 3 years, I feel the whole creative process has been a journey of becoming EC, East and Southeast Asian, ESEA, of testing how the acronym feels in our mouths, sharing our stories in safe spaces, listening and co-learning, building our own narratives, creating our own mythologies, acts of self-determination. So doing this work with the support of the Centre for Equity and Inclusion and being in community with PGRs and people in the city who are engaged in racial justice work has provided a framework of love and mutual care, of reflection and gentle criticality. In these spaces, we have come together to explore and express our own experiences. In a world climate of division, false narratives, hatred, and genocide, we need to keep making these spaces, to be in community with love, solidarity, and resistance, to imagine together and rehearse our liberations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elin. And I've had the pleasure of watching that project progress over the years and attended the Scratch performance and then the Ancestral Futures performance too. So I've been privy to the collaborative practice that's gone into it. And that's something we're going to start talking a bit more now in our panel discussion with Elin and the Sadaka group. So if Dom and Ella and Elin could join us on the stage, hopefully we can unpick a little bit more the spirit of that collaboration and how it can be enacted within university contexts. So, yeah, Dom, Ella, Elin. Okay, great. Before we get into the actual discussion, I just want to invite each speaker to introduce themselves. I guess, Elin, you've already done so, but we've not yet met the Sadaka group today, so perhaps, Ella, if you could go first, just to give us a bit of an insight to your professional practice, your relationship to Sadaka, and maybe a little word on the Pirate Radio project that we're going to discuss in a second.
I thought I'd get away with this. I thought you was going to do it for us. So I didn't have anything prepared for an introduction. But yeah, I'm Ella Barrett. I'm from Chesterfield originally, but I've lived in and out of here for like the last 6-7 years. And I went to the university and I studied history. And that's kind of like the foundation of like a lot of my work is like from a public history perspective. In particular, looking at kind of African Caribbean sort of histories and like almost like diasporic as well across time and space as well. My introduction to Sadaka is within the archive, the Bantu Archive Programme, which started in 2021. It was myself, Alex, Jonathan, who's over there, Rosie, who did like amazing work with us, Rob, McCall, and Alicia. And then we worked with the live projects team as well at the university. And that was kind of like really like looking at, importantly, Mark Hutchinson was also a part of that, who sadly passed away a few years ago. So part of that kind of project was looking at the voice of the African Caribbean community in Sheffield. And to do that, we started with like an oral history sort of perspective, and that kind of really grounded the project. And has since kind of like really kind of like evolved the project to be really like fundamentally grounded by that. So the different sort of projects that we've done is, like we said, the Black History Map in tour, and then we also started the Pirate Radio project, from sound system to pirate radio. And that kind of started from an interview in 2021 that I didn't even know that Pirate was in Sheffield, and I couldn't believe, like, I was probably like 22 at the time. And I was like, oh my God, like, how am I just learning about this now? And that kind of perspective is like fundamental to like looking at my relationship to kind of like oral histories, but in particular Sheffield. I think it's a very like oral city. A lot of things are very much like said, but it's not necessarily like written down. And it's not importantly written down from the perspective of like African Caribbean people. So that's when we started etching and researching out Pirate Radio and looking at the ways that it was documented and if there's any archival footage to kind of represent that, and then interviewing people to really like understand how like Pirate was like formulated in the city. Because if you type it in, like you get a lot of stuff in regards to like the 1960s and like the boat that rocked, kind of that kind of perspective. And then obviously like London and like kind of like how it propped up sort of like grime and garage sort of like genres, but not really in Sheffield. So that kind of like hyper-local perspective is really kind of like brought into fruition through like oral histories and then the dissemination of that. I don't know if that's a really long introduction, sorry.
Yes, sister. Blessings, everyone. I'm not as fluent as the panel speaking. I just wrote some notes, really. But yeah, my name's Dom. Born in Sheffield. Jamaican grandparents came over here in 1956. So my identity is very much etched into, you know, West Indian culture, and trying to kind of find my identity as a young man was quite difficult. So through that, I founded Slam Bars, which is a music organization for underrepresented artists of working class and mostly like diasporan backgrounds in Sheffield. We work on artist development. We work on creating inclusive spaces where they can find representation amongst their peers and also articulate that through the music. I also researched the engagement between arts and communities and how organizations are kind of trying to implement restorative practices to help, you know, these young people through, you know, adolescence and more so creativity. The heart of my practice is that music is a healing and almost like therapeutic modality. So at Slam Bars, that's where we feel like stage performance, you know, collective creation, just being in a space where other artists are kind of sharing their own experiences as a way to kind of alleviate some trauma. And I've probably spent the past decade building platforms that elevate unheard voices. So at Slam Bars, we use music, film, and collaborative events to spotlight identity, nurture creative careers, and document lived experience. My practice also includes strategic partnership development and cultural programming. Having collaborated with Tramlines, we've got a stage at Tramlines, which is, it's really, really good because obviously in Sheffield we're kind of known for indie music, which is fine. You know, we all love the Arctic Monkeys and Def Leppard, etc., but we actually use this platform to, you know, kind of infuse our identity on a scale like that with like 50,000 people. So that's how we kind of spotlight a lot of artists through that. So yeah. Bless.
Thanks, Dom. Dom's got a saying, gratitude is attitude, and I think about that honestly every day I wake up, or at some point in my day, I have Dom's voice in my head, gratitude is attitude. And hearing Dom speak, hearing Ella speak, and having watched Eileen's presentation, I feel very grateful that in an academic context, at an academic conference that we put together, we have these creatives to share a platform with. It feels like a special thing we've been able to cultivate. And I feel grateful to have shared some proximity with you and for you to have stepped into this university space, which, as we know, can be harmful to racially marginalized communities and creatives. So I feel grateful, and I want to voice that. As I say, I've got not only Dom's voice in my head, I've got Dom sat in front of me, so I've got to say it. And we wanted to put this section on for today's conference, thinking about work exploring identity, culture, and heritage for global majority communities, and specifically how universities connect with that, can support that, enrich it rather than take something away from it. I come from an arts background, and it's something that's very important to me, but I'm very wary of the issues that have manifested historically. So I'm quite keen to have a conversation about that dynamic and how maybe you've been able to navigate it and some of the learnings that we should take from your experience within the centre and elsewhere, because each of you have some proximity to the university in some kind of way. So perhaps as my opening question really is, could you kind of reflect on previous work with the university and speak to any issues that you've encountered in that kind of collaborative practice? Any main things that strike you as sort of warning signs, signals that we should be thinking about as we try and collaborate with other artists, practitioners as yourself?
I feel like this question, I feel like I can answer it in two kind of ways. I think like this institution like Sheffield, like university, like is definitely made up of like great individuals, Alex 100% being one of them, Aranza here being one of them in connection with like the archive, and then like I said, Rosie Knight and Jonathan as well. And I feel like these people have like really, I think for me personally, I wouldn't actually be doing anything that I'm doing without them giving me a platform and an opportunity to really like almost like foster a certain perspective that I think was definitely like missing in regards to the potential of a community archive and its connection within like actual in academia, with definitely inverted commas. So like I'm super grateful for that, and I don't think like I said, I wouldn't be here. But the same tone, I think I was already in the institution, right, and I was already had like access to kind of like that sort of like base of knowledge, and I think that I really struggled with that. I think I remember when I was in my first year at university, we did a module on it was like different like historical moments of importance, which are all obviously like Western, and it was to do with like this like intersectionality between like class and race. And I was just sat there infuriated because I was paying like £9,250 to like listen to this. I was like, this should be like accessible like through, everyone should be able to access this type of history. It's super important in regards to like formulating you not only as like a person in an individual way, but also in regards to like your community and also like your understanding of like self within like this nation state. And I was about to swear then, but I just remembered like where I was. Yeah, and that kind of like formulation of people, history making people, I think is like so important. So the uni has like massive obstacles to kind of like really deal with in regards to kind of like how it treats people who aren't necessarily in the institution. Because like I said, like I had to be in the institution to get to definitely have the opportunities presented to me. I was talking to Rosa earlier as well. I think the centre does a great job of it, like organically, and also like Roots and Futures, Lizzie over there as well, and Courtney. They do a great job at like organically going into institute, organically kind of like, I would say knowledge exchange with community groups, and really like asking them what they want or what they need. And that could be kind of like money as a resource, or it could be kind of like time, or even like facilitation. I think that's a really important like factor that I think the centre has definitely prioritised, and a level of freedom, which I think is super important. With other projects I've kind of been a part of, it's very much like a delegation, and you're kind of seen as the community partner, but not seen as an equal a lot of the time, whereas I never have that perspective with the people that I've mentioned. So yeah, I think I look at it in a very like a big duality, to be honest, because I really do respect a lot of time and effort people have put into like my practice that I've helped to disseminate to within the archive. But I also agree how it's a bureaucratic system, and you kind of do have to be in it to really see the scope of it as well.
Thank you. So, yeah, I mean, like you said, it is really down to individuals. I mean, the individuals from the university that are in this room, and, you know, all credit to Alex. I think, you know, Alex, you're one main reason why a lot of us are kind of here and have stuck with it for 3 years. And we really appreciate you and really enjoy working with you. And, so, I mean, I think you and I had been working together a bit before through your role at Knowledge Exchange, as together with Jonathan. And so I'd been having conversations with you about you know, setting up the Centre for Equity and Inclusion, and did I want to be a partner? And of course, if it was maybe someone else running it, I wouldn't be so sure. But because it was you, and I really respected where you're coming from. I trusted you, and I was happy to come on board. But I've been a practicing artist for a few decades now, so I have never really worked in a university, but I have had close proximity to sort of like university structures and cultures, been visiting lecturer, visiting artist, that kind of thing. And yeah, I'm well aware of the issues and the sort of like violent structures that are perpetrated in those institutions, particularly to not only students but also tutors of colour and global majority people. So yeah, I think I would, I would really think, not just twice, but probably several times about whether I would go into a partnership with a university. And, not just university, the institution of the university, but I've also, as an artist, worked in other institutions, in arts institutions, and my experience of working in some of those institutions have been the worst experiences of my life, and that's in the creative industries. So, that kind of violence is somehow sort of perpetuated just in the walls. Even if you've got different people running that space, different people coming in and out, even global majority people running those spaces, they can still perpetuate the same violence that seems to be embedded in the walls of institutions.
Yeah, we're talking some things now. Gratitude to Alex. In the Centre of Inclusion, Ankita, Jao, Sam Holland, Mac, Uncle Bob, and the many other staff members who are trying to, shake the shit up. I'm just gonna say how it is, in all fairness. But yeah, I've not really had much of a relationship with the institution, really and truly, until Alex had kindly said there's scope to kind of have some, I'd say, collaborative change, because I think a lot of the time when we are talking about universities, it's resource rich, but does those resources reflect where we're coming from, on ground level? Does the space actually look like we can exist in there? It's not just a case of, I'm trying to visit there, I need a book, I need to speak to someone, or it's a good space to kind of, quiet space to kind of study. It's like, do we actually belong there? And I feel a lot of the time is with our community organizations, there's been this massive tip box of we need y'all lot in, we're diverse because we've got these youths in here, and that means that we're, all on the same team. But really it's a bit exploitative, it seems very extractive. It's not really a shared, process. So again, I've not really had that much positives, but I would like to shout out Off the Shelf as well. Leslie, Sarah, their team, Maria, they have massively helped, our organization, get into spaces like the showroom, like the Uni of, and other spaces where our young people can actually have their voices heard. So I think all I'm trying to say is we need to kind of have a more, more collaborative, approach rather than take, Cool.
It's been my experience, and it's coming out from these answers as well, that it's often individuals within an institution that make or break a collaboration or a partnership with an artist, a creative, or a marginalized community group, which doesn't feel like the most kind of sustainable or stable way in which for an institution to operate, to rely on those few people that kind of have a certain politics or a certain vision or a certain way of doing things. And I think one of the questions that we've been asking ourselves at the centre is, now that it's coming to its formal end, how do we kind of scale our activity so that it could become more institutional without becoming institutionalized and therefore diluted? It doesn't feel sustainable, as I say, to have an individual constantly having to pick it up, because that individual could go and then it could collapse. And then what happens to the relationships that have been forged over many years? And it's probably worth saying that 9 of the 10 partnerships that have been here for the last 3 years came from work that had been going on for years before. That kind of relationship building was instructive. And you've mentioned the word collaboration a few times. I wondered if we could dial into that a bit. What are the key components of collaborative practice for you that helps nurture the kind of relationships that we've been trying to build via the centre? I was really struck, Elin, as you were taking us through these projects, just how collaborative they are, kind of the depth of work that you go into to kind of harness that collaborative spirit. What are the key components in your experience of that perhaps we could learn from and try and implement in the future?
So yeah, my practice has always been collaborative, really. And I think the first and foremost, I think it's trust. So it's like, building trust with whoever you're collaborating with. And I think ensuring that all parties are coming to a space as equals. So, I mean, when you're in the role as artist or facilitator, you know, obviously you do have the power. But to set up spaces in a way that you try to, you know, disseminate that power and set up equitable spaces, you know, really be clear about, you know, the framework of collaboration, like the terms of engagement, really, and what are the values of the project. And I think that it's really relationship building. And I think really at the beginning of a project, things need to be, certain activities need to take place, trust building activities. And then when the trust is built, and then you've got opportunities then to really, you know, to fly, really, to work together. But then I think also it's about being flexible, adaptable, open to change, because whatever frameworks you do set up, you guarantee there'll be a point in a project when you know, things need to shift and change. Set up space for failure, for testing, experimenting, for chaos, and then, you know, they're all like creative challenges, and it's usually the unexpected things that really result in the most creative outcomes. So it's really a process. It's a process-led thing. So it's durational. It's time-based, and also, you know, depending on each kind of project, you know, maybe the collaboration is over a day or 5 days. A 12-week, like a term, or it's over a year or several years. But I think it's also important to be mindful of the time. What time have you got together? So how deep is the collaboration going to be, and be realistic about that.
I think you summed it up like perfectly, to be honest. I don't think I have much more to add. I think in regards to the work that we do, because it's oral history based, I think trust is like fundamental to working with kind of any institution, and really like honouring the ethics of like what you agree with the interviewer and you as the interviewee, the interviewer and the interviewee, and how like strong that relationship is, and almost like bubble wrapping it as well, and making sure people feel comfortable sharing, and even like as an interviewer realising that even though they were comfortable saying it, it might not necessarily be okay for it to be published in a certain way, and double checking and making sure that's all okay. I think there's such a like power within oral histories, but I think that power is only kind of like reaches that potential when you have that element of trust and kind of like ethical sort of agreement in line. So I think for me, like same with everyone was saying, the process I think is so important. I think even like yesterday we had McCall, Dom and myself had a workshop, and looking at like how we've evolved what like this tiny idea to like a project, and it's taken so many different like turns and added so many questions and answers and failures and solutions. Like you really just have to trust it and like enjoy like every part of the process, because at the end of the day I think we're doing things that are quite passionate to us, so it becomes hard, it becomes stressful, it can become like emotional. So I think it's really kind of like feeling the joy within that, which I think comes with freedom as well, which I feel really biased because I feel like I always work with Alex, and I feel like he's like my friend. Like we rang him yesterday, and I was like, I feel like we shouldn't be ringing him at like 6 o'clock, but we just like rang him anyway and was just like talking about an element of the project. But I think, yeah, every project that we've done, we've had like that element of transparency and respect and trust, which I think has been able to kind of all of us take something away, and then the project also have its own like legs to it.
I couldn't have really said it better, really. Values, trust, ethics, freedom, creative freedom, and you know, having those elements, working with young people on the ground. You know, things are changing ever so quickly, and I think I'd like to say urgency and like fluidity with the process. So, for instance, when we was doing the off the shelf and you brought an Ethiop up, it was kind of like, okay, this guy's coming. All right, when's he coming? All right, okay, he's coming in like 3 weeks. All right, so what's next? And it's kind of enabling us to have that creative kind of freedom to guide the young people, artists on the way to keep them engaged. Whereas a lot of times, if we was going into like a bureaucratic process, it might be like 6 months. And then we've lost the hearts and the interest of the young people already. Then that means that we have to build that trust up with them because they feel neglected or let down and unseen. So I think having that urgency, that trust, that creative kind of control definitely is important. Yeah.
First of all, I never mind getting a call from Ella at any time, within reason. But no, always happy. But time is emerging for me as part of your responses. There's institutional time and there's community time, and what the institution considers urgent often follows a pattern of the academic year. We're probably in that time now, actually, for academics. Feeling a sense of urgency, and end of financial year is in July, and so we have to wrap up these projects quickly before kind of putting a stop to them, and then we'll pause for the summer and we'll start a new project again in September. By and large, that's not really how things are lived outside of the institution. So what Dom is talking about when it comes to urgency, what's urgent to the institution does not necessarily mean what's urgent for those on the ground working in community. And I found one of the challenges and one of the things to learn is how to be able to flip between the two time zones, in effect. And I certainly feel like leading into the community time is better practice. And I think that's led probably to the more successful projects. The other thing that's been mentioned is about freedom. One of the really great things that I think we've been able to have with the funded resource for the centre over a 3-year period is freedom. We've been able to work on a longer scale, not to deliver loads and loads of outputs, but rather to test ideas, to fail, to refine, to pilot, to try again. And maybe nothing actually comes from that process other than the really key learning. And this has been a 3-year experiment, as I said at the beginning of today. And I think that's allowed a lot of these new projects like the Pirate Radio project to flourish and to grow and to go into different directions, like the partnership agreement, like the evaluation exercise, because we've had quite a unique situation where we've been able to grant freedom beyond this very stilted 9 to 12 month academic year, which is often how things are governed. How you get that outside of a centre, unique kind of bespoke project infrastructure is a challenge. Once the centre comes to an end, how do we keep that? How do we give that freedom? How do we facilitate that freedom and that testing zone when we go back to kind of the previous ways of working? That's a challenge, and I think it's for the university to shift rather than for community to shift. But I think that's one of the challenges that is emerging for me as you're talking about the value of durational working and the freedom. So I did want to kind of move a little bit away from institutional speak and think a bit about storytelling, because in a theme around culture, heritage and identity, a lot of this comes down to storytelling. And we were talking about this at yesterday's event. There's so much for a university to learn about the different storytelling practices that exist in community amongst artists. And I just wondered, from the work that you've been doing in either the Pirate Radio project or Elin over a number of years now on the Performing Identities project, are there any kind of particular storytelling processes or practices that have been particularly rich for you that you would like to share or to discuss that perhaps we can learn from effectively?
I'm just gonna go. So about 2 years ago, I emailed Elin, was like, listen, Elin, like, I'm wanting to start a documentary. I don't know how to do film, but I know it's a very rich storytelling practice, and a lot of what we like to capture is the artist's journey, and then almost like disseminate it in a way which is accessible, and film is a very accessible way of doing that. But I don't have no experience. So I was like, hey, are you able to help me? and she came, and we sat in the Crescent Virgin, and she was like, right, just get a theme, get a short out, and share it out. And I was like, okay. 2 years later, we had a theme. We've just launched our documentary, which we premiered about 2 weeks ago at the showroom, and it's out. And I feel like sometimes the storytelling isn't actually in the art. It's about having someone who can tell you how to navigate that story process, if that makes sense. And that was healing for me. So, like, yeah, it's yeah, man, bless up. Seek your elders, 'cause they've got the stories. That's the storytelling practice. Like, speak with people, not an elder, of course. You know what I'm trying to say? Of course.
I take it.
But, like, seek the people who have the knowledge, who've done the groundwork, because that in itself is a story to take forward, and you're able to kind of, you know, infuse that into your practice in whatever it is.
Thanks, Dom. That's really, really generous. And a really interesting way, I think, of looking at it. Storytelling and, like, just, like, I mean, you don't have to seek wisdom just from elders. We can pass it on to each other, and we can also find wisdom in young people, in children, and but yeah, and it is storytelling. It's like oral history, isn't it? And just communicating with each other and sharing, having exchanges, I think. But I think that's one of the great things about the centre is that it's kind of brought all of us people together. I mean, we knew each other before, but because of doing this type of work anyway. But for me, all these connections and, like, new connections we've made that, and all sort of working together on this shared goal of racial justice is actually, it makes me really proud to be living in Sheffield. I lived for 20 years in London, and I don't know, I mean, since the murder of George Floyd and the upsurgence again of the Black Lives Matter movement, and then since, Trump got back in, all the EDI agendas are being, like, squashed. And, I think at the time when, there was that Stop Asian Hate, Black Lives Matters, it seemed like, yeah, we can change things. It's gonna, but also a few of us are quite long in the tooth. Like, okay, we've got a window here, because it's only going to be open for a while, then it's going to shut. And then I know quite a lot of people that work in TV and broadcast, and yeah, same. A few of my friends, they got commissions to make black stories, for example, and yeah, apparently now all those windows have already shut. But for this to be still happening and very active and dynamic in Sheffield makes me, feel proud to be a part of it and to be proud to be living in Sheffield.
Thank you. I feel like these guys have mentioned a lot that I was going to say in regards to storytelling, and, like, I think people as well. I think I'm not a great oral history interviewer, but I love the idea of how conversation can lead anywhere and everywhere. And that could be, like, at a conference like today, it could be, like, on Moore Market, or it could be, like, at Sadaka just interviewing someone. And, like, I think the key word is, like, organic relationships, and how your temperament and how you talk to people is of real importance, and how that can really, like, guide. Your word says a lot, right? So how it can guide people and guide yourself as well. But I think with storytelling as well, I think working in archiving, and then from doing like more artistic sort of like development kind of work, I think documentation to me is, like, so important, and realizing how there's not much documentation of, like, marginalized lives in Sheffield, and there's not many within archive spaces as well. So I think that element to, like, my practice and in regards to, like, storytelling is, like, so important. I think Sheffield has changed so much since, like, 2020. I can't even believe how much rent is compared to, like, how much it was a few years ago, and that's, like, on such a tiny scale in comparison to other parts of the country. And just, like, looking at the landscape of Sheffield, it is constantly changing, and the idea of like it getting touched by gentrification is such an interesting topic, because I didn't think it would happen at this like scale. So looking like the work that we've been doing recently is kind of like looking at like youth clubs and teaching them how to like document their community. Well, they're the best people to document their area. They've lived there, they live and breathe it, and really like trying to like exchange that skill of documentation and how important it is. I remember like in a few years, well, last year there was a miners' strike. It was like the anniversary of Orgreave, and how there's so much, like they were amazing at documenting that process. And so it's such a massively important historical moment for like working class rights, but also kind of like a whole scale of like intersectional sort of issues were at interplay during that time. And how well they documented it is such a case to how we should document our communities, and especially like marginalised communities, because no one else is going to do it. And if they do, the element of like profit incentivization is so different. So yeah, I think that idea of storytelling from archival to documentation is a really important thread that definitely needs to kind of be like developed in, like I said, in a more organic way.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, because that's a really instructive reminder of the moment that we're in now. There's a lot of excitement in Sheffield. You know, we're seeing all of these changes happening, as you say, and even myself, there's an excitement moving through the city centre to see these new things. But the reminder that these big institutions and organisations that make the decisions in Sheffield always run the risk of squashing those doing things on the ground from marginalised communities. And that practice of storytelling in the way that you're describing is about trying to preserve, platform, and let people know about, you know, the other kind of ecologies, to use a word that we've been talking about a lot recently, in Sheffield that perhaps, you know, don't benefit from some of the gentrification that you're describing. And yeah, for us within the university, there's a certain responsibility to not only keep in mind, but to actually connect with this other work that's happening, and to ensure that it's allowed to flourish within this ever-changing city that we have so much control over as a huge institution. That's all the time we have for the panel. So I just want to say thank you again, and to express more gratitude towards you. It's been really rich to hear your thoughts, and I'm really keen for the next section, because we promised today that this wasn't just going to be information giving, this is going to be about performance, and we're really about to see evidence now of this new pirate radio pilot that's been in the works for some months from Sedaka. This is a trial completely, right? So we're in the pirate radio space, we're going to live it, what happens, and yeah, we're looking forward to it. So I'm going to hand over to Sedaka to show us some of that, but for now, just to say thank you to the three panelists.
People just take a 2-minute break just to reset, recharge. If you need to go get some water. You know, you've been sat down for a while, so just take some 2 minutes. We're just gonna get set up, okay? All right. Should we make a start?
So this part of the talk is a half like in conversation and almost like a dissemination of the process that we've started with the Pirate Radio project. The title is From Sound System to Pirate Radio, Music from the Front Room. And it kind of, like I mentioned earlier, looks at the space of pirate radio in propping up not only community centres but different genres of music, community bulletins, and looking at tastemakers as in the community and how they've really scoped out different sort of like lived experiences that, like we said, aren't in any other archive, and a lot of the time it's very London centric. My connection to like pirate radio kind of came, like I said earlier, just from like a quite innocent conversation. mixed in with an oral history interview. So in 2022, I saw General Levy. He had a book launch in Sadaka, and then I asked if I could quickly talk to him about being in Sadaka, which was the first kind of like interview we did in regards to like pirate radio, and looking at the significance of that in Sheffield, but specifically through Sadaka. So what we're going to do is like the part of this session is looking at playing different sort of like oral history interviews that we've conducted over like this process. So the first one is General Levy in 2022.
Before we do that, let me just check, like, does everybody know what pirate radio is? Yeah? Who wants to describe what it is? Alex, introduce. All right. Uncle Bob, I think you're in the front seat, man. You're in the front row, man. You want to tell us what pirate radio is from your understanding under 20 seconds?
My understanding, it's a means of communities to get their music out that they like, that they couldn't hear on terrestrial BBC Radio 1 or whatever, you know, was playing some kind of music, but not music that we would listen to. So it was a way to get our music out there and get it listened to. Springing on me like that. Yeah.
1992, Dance FM, Tower Block, Norfolk Park, floor 12, something like that. Knock on the door when it's time for your set, that kind of thing, playing out to whoever. Yep. And go. Yeah, DJ John Boy, Magic Love Show, Friday night, 12 Wild 2.
Yeah, man. So, as articulated so wonderfully by our people there. Yeah, so pirate radio is was and is a form of radio that is, I guess, in resistance to the mainstream form of radio, going kind of underground, you know, to play types of music that isn't playing in the mainstream. Just to summarize, and you know, it's been happening for decades in the US and UK and across the world, and that's what we're speaking to today, but localizing it within Sheffield context. So I want to make sure people understood that. Cool? All right, General Levy, yeah? Okay, we're in the interview.
It was a community centre. It was a place where people can come and gather and like-minded people, listen to reggae music, listen to hip-hop, whatever music they like. But it was definitely a centre point for people who were like-minded. And an important part of the community centre was often on the Friday and on Saturday we used to have the dances, you know, with the sound systems and stuff. So that's how I know Sadaka Centre, because a gentleman called Austin used to book us to come to Sadaka Centre in Sheffield, and with the help of the pirate radio stations, they would get the word around, and then everybody would know that this Friday we're going to be doing something at the Sadaka Centre. So, in conjunction with the pirate radios and the community centre, the community would often get a good diet of music.
Do you remember what radio station it was? Was it Sheffield Community Radio, the one that used to play?
C, you know, I can't remember, you know, C something.
C.
I can't remember.
SCR.
Something like that. It's really been a while. But I remember it was definitely it was a bubbling, prominent radio station. It was definitely busy and definitely successful. Yeah, it worked.
How did people take to your music in Sheffield compared to like home?
Everywhere was good. I mean, to be honest with you, back in the day, it's like how it is now, similar to now, really. Once stuff takes off in London, it usually takes off around the rest of the country straight away. So we'd already dominated London, so Sheffield and these places were just icing on the cake. It was like we'd already established ourselves in London, and often when we come to these places, just the fact that we're from London was often it's like export and import. We were like an export coming into the Sheffield. So we've always had a great response from Sheffield audiences. They like the energy and love the vibes.
Yes, that was amazing, man. I didn't even know you actually did that interview. Wow. I guess should we tell them about the project and kind of what we've been working on and how, why we're here today? Tell us, introduce us, and we'll just pass it on.
Yeah, so my kind of role within the project is mainly kind of like research based in a way. So looking at the research of Pirate Radio in Sheffield and then conducting the interviews, doing the transcriptions, and then working with the workshops that we all three of us are kind of like pieced together within different sort of like roles. And then I also kind of looked at artistic interpretation, so commissioning artists based on the interviews to kind of like put them in their practice and their art form. I think fundamentally Pirate Radio really speaks to this like idea of like power out of restriction. Like I think when McCall and I did an interview, we asked like how did it feel, like this idea of like having the most amount of freedom by able to play whatever you wanted. And a lot of the time it was like it was genre pushing. It was pushing things that had never really been heard outside of like homes, but you were broadcasting it on like a very like local level, but also amplifying the sound. But also it's legal, right? You're not allowed to do it, and the risk of you being put in jail and all your possessions in regards to records being taken, that line and how fine that line is speaks to this duality of kind of like Black Britishness and how we as like the Black community have really like pushed so many genres within culture, within all kind of like sort of like realms forward. So that was fundamentally like what we were speaking to, and we were speaking about this in like this hyper-local sort of perspective. And we kind of, we obviously wanted to work with Dom and the kids at Slam Bars because we wanted to understand this transactory and this like historical sort of like legacy of resistance through music and through space. This idea that a tower block, which is like a real signifier of like this post-war sort of utopia, which then towards like the 80s and 90s was seen as like had such a like bad reputation, could unleash this amount of freedom, is such a duality that we really wanted to like them to speak to, but also reflect, and their perspective was really important to us. So we kind of built that into like the workshop format. I'll take it to these guys.
And that's kind of what you've touched on is what brought me into the project as well. Is this like growing up, my dad, he was involved in the scene, kind of the kind of late stages of it, and he told me stories about Pirate Radio and kind of how he was involved in his friends, and stories about like climbing up kind of tower blocks and dodging the cops and trying to fix satellites, one room getting raided, okay cool, where's the next one, like this energy, this hustle that was involved. And like he's kind of, what he would always tell me is kind of like your younger guys don't really know what it was like to get out there, like to really kind of risk it for the music, risk it for the culture. And that's kind of always stuck with me. So I guess that was a massive inspiration to this project. It's like it's an incredible time and thing that happened. I guess what we was wanting to do is how can we bring back that essence at a time where music is so accessible now. This is not to discredit the work that artists put in these days, but it's different. Like it's different. You can go on SoundCloud, you can go on YouTube, and you can be an overnight sensation with social media. So what we was wanting to do is like see if we can challenge ourselves and challenge our community to see if we can bridge the gap between the people of now, the youngers of now, the artists of now, the rappers, the local ones, with the knowledge and the skills from the elders, from the previous generation that we kind of, the music that we got brought up into. And that's the aim of the project. You want to add on that, brother? Yeah.
I just want to say so like all the work that the team had done before Slam Bars had any sort of part to kind of play was incredible. The interviews, the context of why Pirate exists and how it's important, and almost like how that trickles down into the art that we do on the ground. And I feel like a lot of the time there was them before, now there's us now, and there's this massive gulf where in actual fact, because of those really brilliant, insightful interviews and the process, it actually allowed the young people to see themselves a former part of history, that it still actually applies to them, and there's still a lot of resistance in how they do their art on the ground at the moment. So I just think it's been a very rich experience of kind of galvanizing two different parts of time to kind of symbolize resistance. Yeah.
Yeah, before we run that, I was just gonna say, like, I kind of see us as like the middle child, you know, of kind of like the elders and the youngers. Now we can sit in the middle where we understand kind of the culture, understand kind of the essence of what the elders went through, but we're trying to bring it to the youngers. And like, we was speaking to some of the young artists yesterday. One of them told me that she was born in 2007. So it's, you know, there is a gap, man. Like there's definitely a generational gap, and that's what we're trying to bridge. And it's not just like a top down. Like, it's also, all right, how can we also use the skills and the talent and the energy from the young gen and fuse it with kind of the foundation that the elders have kind of set and make a new thing, you know, like bring it together. So, yeah. Aris, if you're in the OJ rhythm, all right.
This is a little long, but I think McCall and I both did this interview, and I had to stop myself from laughing so many times because I didn't want to be laughing on the audio. But this is him talking about basically what a setup of like pirate radio looked like, which I think, like McCall was saying, like, I don't know why I'm using your Sunday name.
All right, man, it's all right.
But yeah, I think, like we said, they're a lot younger, so this idea of what happened during that time is quite different. And like, we've set up a semi kind of like pirate set in this idea of like touch and kinetic connection, which I think is so essential to pirate in the way that, like Oris mentioned, he almost talks about it in such a visual way, even though it's auditory. I think is really important, and it kind of speaks to the ways in which like we've disseminated the knowledge. So yeah, Oris, Jay is the second clip.
When, as a DJ, like if you had a set on pirate radio, what would that look like? If you're like, in terms of like the setup, like where would you go? Kind of how would that go from like for you?
As in, when you say where would I go, as in like location,
Yeah.
or just how I would set up the sound what I'm gonna play.
Both. So like, how would that night look like for you? So like, let's say you got a set on Park Hill, for example, kind of you link in town, you go up to Park Hill, you maybe knock on a guy's door, you answer the door. Like,
That's
could you describe that?
Yeah. So Pirate was an interesting one because as much as when you're on there, you're in a little zone, and as far as you're concerned, everything is blessed. There's no illegalities or anything. It's just you doing you, you know, for the people. But the way there is different, right? Because when you go in there, you kind of feel that you're doing something a little bit naughty, right? Because you've got to meet somebody in a location, right? And they're very shady. And remember, you've got to think that the phones that you're using at this point, I was either using phones or we're using pages or we're using word of mouth. So imagine it's like, if you imagine a conversation I have with a guy this week, he said to me, next week I'll meet you at 7. I'm not going to see this guy again till next week at 7. Anything could have happened by then, you know, it could have, you know, forgot, you know, just a number of things could have happened, but you put all your trust in, you're going to meet that guy at 7, he'll meet you and they'll tell you the radio station's now moved, you now got to follow him to this other location. But in reality, they never let you down because a lot of these pirate radio stations ran it like a proper station, right? They knew a lot of these kids, a lot of these people on these stations, they haven't got mobile phones, some of them haven't got pages, so they had to do word of mouth, and word of mouth was literally, could be a week in advance. No one's checked, I can't check with anyone. So if you said to me, I'll meet you bottom of Park Hill, 7 o'clock, Saturday night. Okay, that's 7 days. I've got to be there, and if I'm not there and you're not there, I'm not going to see you again because I don't know what the next meeting point would be, so I have to be there. Then you got to think how you're getting there as well. Are you bringing a big bag? Because if you are, it looks hot. So you've got to think, you've got to bring a sports bag or something that looks inconspicuous when you go in there. So even the setup of it like this feels a bit like you're doing something a bit naughty, you know? But what overrides that feeling is the vibe of knowing when you get on that station, you're going to be playing to the people and you've got brand new tunes. and you've just spent all of your gyro or whatever on this music, right? So at this point here, you know it's a vibe and you have to get up there. And you know what will happen is if you get there, potentially someone's going to hear you and go, I want to book you. So to you, there's so many reasons that you have to do this, even though the one reason is, you know, it's probably not as legal as, you know, you'd want it to be. Like you get to the station now, it's probably, if it was on Park Hill, you probably got to go up 14 floors or whatever to get there. Sometimes the lift works, sometimes the lift don't. That's the risk you take. If the lift don't work, you got 14 flights of stairs to get up or whatever it is to get to the station. You get to the station, you're blowing. So like, it's deep, right? It'll be some tiny little room that you're in, like a little spare room, just big enough for you lot. But imagine the DJ before you still there. So you've got that. This was in an era where you could smoke freely, right? So you go in there to DJ before you're smoking. In there was it just smoked out, but you didn't care, you know. Like now, if I went in a room and it was smoky, I'm like, I'll wait outside. See, then you'd go straight in, right? Because you're like, this is the smoke doesn't matter, the piracy doesn't matter. All what matters is getting on them decks now. I would have already set up my music so I know what I'm going to play first. I know what my last tune's going to be. The rest I might juggle, but I definitely knew what I'm playing first because that's your intro. That's what's setting you up. So if someone's going to if they've listened to the last DJ, you need something that's going to keep them to stay with you, right? Because if you just completely change sometimes what's going on, they'll tune on to something else. So I'm like, okay, so I need a big tune or a tune that's everyone's going to know to start. So then I know I've got a captive audience. Bearing in mind, you don't know if that captive audience is just your grandma or is it 1,000 people. You don't know, but you still got to set up the mindset that you're playing to 1,000 people. Because if you just go in there and say, I'm just playing for my grandma, you're going to sound like you're just playing for your grandma. You understand? So you have to go in with the mentality is this is real. Play your first tune, your MCs are warming up. They're probably lighting their cigarettes whilst we're up there. It's smoky. You're saying goodbye to the last guy. You forgot the mic still turned on, even though you just been chatting breeze about something, you know. So there's all things you got to be thinking about all the time when you're up there. It's like a job. It's not a joke thing. It's a job. But once you're in and you're on, as soon as you're on them decks and you're DJing and you're doing your thing, everything just feels correct. You know, like there's no wrong in this. All you're doing is providing the right things for the people. That's all you're doing. There's no wrong. And then the situation you got to meet. Normally they've got a guy who looks after the station. You meet him and they'll say, right, I'll meet you next week, same time, but this time I'm going to meet you in this location instead. I'm like, okay, wicked. So then you just got to remember, be there, because if you're not there, that show's missing. Because sometimes they've got to move the stations. The good pirates, they might be in the same location for a couple of months. The ones that are not so good might have to move a little bit more frequently. It wasn't a big deal for me as a DJ, but I guess for them it was because they got to get on the roof. Like that side of pirate I've never got into. I just know that me and roofs were never friends. I just know I want to turn up, play the music. I don't really want to know too much about what's going on the roof. You know what I mean?
Wicked. Yeah, man. The things that we do for art and the things that we do for love, you know, the love of our passion, you know, because it's more than just music, innit? Like, that's what we've been learning from the interviews and from the youngers as well. Like, this is more than just music. It's freedom, it's expression, it's a way to kind of just, get themselves out there in a society that conditions them and keeps them enclosed. So those risks, as he says, they don't even feel like risks, they're just necessities. It's standard. So that's incredible.
Yeah, and I just feel like in terms of the risk that exists with art, it's a really vulnerable space. A lot of these young people are sharing, you know, some parts of themselves that are really just quite dark, quite reflective. So even that in itself is part of like this process is very vulnerable in a sense, and the risk is the same, it's just a bit different. And like even like how the artists them now will be kind of like, okay, we don't have a studio and we don't have the licensing for this beat, it might cost us £200, we can't obviously afford it. All right, let's get a YouTube converter that will convert the beat and then we can still do our thing. But then we don't have the cash to get a proper cameraman. So alright then, I'll pull the phone out. And it still translates now in that kind of like DIY kind of setup, and they really grasped it, and that is very much in their artistry. As you can see, it's still very edgy, it's still very kind of uncut, because it's supposed to be. It's not supposed to be this rounded and polished finished thing. It's supposed to reflect them and reflect the process. Yeah, what we're saying, Hazel.
Say like how we really took that element into the workshops. I think we were all quite dubious of. I think we set the workshops up being kind of like this historical kind of like outlook of pirate, specifically looking at London and looking at the resources and archive that kind of history has, and then questioning like what do they think about Sheffield, like how can they see this sort of like practice in Sheffield. And we really allowed them to kind of like guide us in what they wanted to take from it. And that kind of is kind of like ledged onto this concept of doing a theatre performance. And it'll be like semi-scripted, but also we've been practicing quite fluidly. Marissa's she's gone. Marissa's the new recruit as of last night into it.
So yeah, look out for it, because what we're doing, we're going to implement the interviews that we've done with some of the elders. We've played these interviews for some of the younger generation, from the young artists from Sheffield. From there, we've asked them to write some bars, some music inspired by that, and then what we're going to do is we've kind of fused it into a theatre production where there will be interviews and live performances from the artists, kind of representing how pirate radio has influenced us and how it's been used as a form of resistance and expression for young black people in Sheffield.
I was going to finish on there's one more audio clip, and it just speaks to kind of like the legacy of pirate, and as we've mentioned, it's like a local perspective, right? But this idea of it being local, as in like a Yorkshire region as well. This is what Winston talks to in the final clip, and that really kind of like grounded, and also like looks at the legacy of this project, not only being like looking at Sheffield from a hyper-local perspective, but travelled on to kind of like Bradford, Leeds, etc. So yeah, I'll finish on that, and you can listen to it if you want to go to the toilet or anything, because I know I feel like we've took too much time. But thank you. I think it's such an interesting idea.
Yeah,
concept.
It was, and often, the difference between that's one difference. I think the main difference between London pirate radio stations and pirate stations outside of London, I would say on a whole, and speaking generally, is that the pirate stations outside of London were they were a citywide community hub. So people came from all parts of the city to do it. Whereas in London, if you were in Shepherd's Bush and there was a pirate station in Shepherd's Bush, it was people from Shepherd's Bush that were on the pirate station, often enough. And same if the pirate station was off Edgware Road, it'd be people around Edgware, or it was very localised. Whereas in Sheffield and other places, you would travel across the city because it wasn't that much of a journey. So you had citywide representation on those, and because of that, the scene was like a citywide scene. So you had everyone into it, rather than it being like a south-west London sound and a north-east London sound, and it wasn't as separated as that at all. It was very unifying. And I think as a result, it probably brought the city together much more than pirate stations probably did in London. I think the opposite was probably true for a while. The structure of the kind of tribal nature of the pirate stations in London created bits of rivalry. Like the postcode rivalry and like the north of the river, south of the river divides rivalry that there is in London. I think it just kind of perpetuated that. So here it was unifying, it was glorifying, it was it created a sense of like a full identity within Sheffield. Do you know what I mean? So it was bigger than your community. Communities from all over the place coming together and realising that, you know, our music wasn't just like this little thing anymore. It was bigger than us, and loads of people got access to it. I mean, it was on a good day when the radio signal was uninterfered with by the elements or whatever. If it didn't have too many hills to cross, sometimes people, and the breeze was blowing the right direction, it could pick it up in Bradford, could pick it up in Leeds. So sometimes it would get further than Sheffield, which was amazing for that when that was happening, because we'd get people coming through and say, "Oh, I picked the radio station up the other night. Yeah, just there was a few tunes for half an hour, you know," and then they've written them down and then they come to the shop. So it created a really broad coming together of people, but without the rivalries that the London pirate stations probably had for a while. I'm not saying that it wasn't like the London station rivalries weren't not like gangster sort of rivalry, but just that north of the river, south of the river divide, east and west divide. People just didn't travel London like they travel the cities up here. You know, so we quite happily travelled across to Bradford, quite happily travelled across to Huddersfield, and if you're in south west London, you pretty much stayed in south west London.
Thank you very much, people.
Great. Thanks, Sadeka. During the panel discussion, I asked about storytelling because in our anti-racist work, I'm often drawing from storytelling practices within the arts. I find that to be a really rich source material, and just hearing you go through the pirate radio setup, something that stuck out was when a building gets shut down, that kind of collective spirit to go and find another building and set up again really resonated when the centre now is coming to its final couple of months of funding within the university. I think the pirate radio ethos needs to be implemented to give it a new life in another building. And I take a lot of heart from that pirate radio ethos. So as I say, the cultural practices that our partners have been sharing with us have really been able for us to evolve and grow more and more. So thank you for sharing that with us.